Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third week of the American Whiskey Certification Program. We are here at the stunning Jack Daniel's Distillery. We're going to spend the next hour going through the ins and outs of how this delicious Tennessee whiskey is made, and I am going to throw it over to Ben Spears, the brand ambassador, who's going to take you through it. Hi, Ben.
Hello, Ben.
How is everybody?
Doing great. How are you?
We're 2 barrels apart here. I'm good. I'm great. It's nice to have you.
Where are we today? What are we doing?
Well, we just dropped off the bus to start at Barrel House 104 back here. So that is one of the 7-story tall barrel houses. So it has about 20,000 barrels inside it or so. We would have built the version of this nature back in the 1960s up until about the 1980s. And then we'll go through a barrel house later toward the end of the tour, which is only 3 stories tall. It's actually the oldest one we have, built back in 1938. So we'll talk a lot, of course, about how the barrel works and how everything's affected by that. But basically a giant sheet metal barn, no insulation, no climate control. So hot in the summer, cold in the winter.
Beautiful. All right, where are we heading now?
We are going to head down to the rickyard, which of course for a Tennessee whiskey maker, the rickyard's a big place for us at Jack because it's where we make the charcoal to use as our activated carbon charcoal filter that we call charcoal mellowing. And that originally came out of what they call the Lincoln County process, developed in Lincoln County, Tennessee in the early 1800s. So the rickyard is just almost like a step upon a step upon a step. Jack Daniel's is one of very few Tennessee whiskey classified whiskeys as far as our standards and techniques. So we use that sugar maple charcoal filtration system. And there's only 2 of us that make our own charcoal for it. And then we also do it open air and man done. And so it's a craft on a craft on a craft. Yeah, watch out, step coming down.
Tell us a little bit about the history of Lynchburg.
So Lynchburg originally was a community on the outskirts of Lincoln County, Tennessee. So I just mentioned the Lincoln County process. That's where that name comes from. And then Lynchburg eventually became part of Moore County in 1871. It became the county seat within that year. And so the history of Jack Daniel's is actually very, very tied to Lincoln County, even though our home now has been Moore County since about 1881. But Jack was born in present-day Lincoln County. He learned to make whiskey in an area called Louse Creek, which also is present-day Lincoln County, Tennessee. And when Jack Daniel's officially registered with the 1866 date as the oldest registered distillery in the United States, we were down at Louse Creek for about 15 years or so. So we moved up to Lynchburg area roughly 1881 and been making whiskey here ever since, minus the Prohibition hiccup. But this is the home of Jack because of the water we'll be seeing shortly enough. The Cave Spring system, which is the source of Jack Daniel's, all whiskey for the entire world of sales, which is roughly now about 170 countries. But a lot of history to the area. We've been making whiskey in this area for now 154 years, down about 15 years or so down the road, and then the rest of it up here for the majority of it.
Cool.
So if y'all want to take a look over the top of it, what you're seeing sitting around there, the big stacks of wood, you'll see them in the distance up the hill and see a few closer by. Those are called ricks. That's why we call this the rickyard. And those are basically like giant Jenga games. There's no nails, there's no glue. And so I'll sit down there with you and we'll talk about how it all works.
Awesome. I'll follow you right down.
So Jack was born in Mulberry, and so he lived there for a very short amount of time. Jack, believe it or not, moved out from his family's home around about the age of 6 or 7 years old. And the story goes that basically is he just didn't see much of a future within his own family. Jack was growing up in the 1850s. Of course, the culture is very different than what we're used to, somewhat hard to understand, almost impossible, really. But everybody got their start earlier. They got beginnings quicker. Their families were growing faster than ours. And so part of it was need and necessity. But Jack was the youngest of 10. And being the youngest of 10, and his family was not doing well financially, their farm wasn't doing great, he basically saw a better future outside of his family. So he moved out to cut his own way. And Jack always was a very, very independent spirit that way, from a child to adult. It's one of the reasons we're still talking about him over 100 years later. So he moved out with his neighbor, lived with his neighbor for about a year, and then he moved in with a guy named Dan Call. So Dan Call was a whiskey maker. He was a store merchant. He ran a general store near his home. He was also a farmer, and he was also a Lutheran minister. And we'll come back to that part. That affects the story, as you can imagine. But Dan was Jack's beginnings in whiskey. He moved into Dan's place not to make whiskey. he moved into Dan's place to actually work the shop, basically be a shopkeep or an errand boy apprentice type. But Dan hired Jack about the age of 8 years old or so. Jack moves in, takes the job, but he really becomes part of the family, of the Dan Call family. He becomes like a little brother to him in a way, helps out around the home, daily, just any kind of task or chores. And within a few months, gets curious about making whiskey. So that's where that began. So we'll talk more about that in a second. Take a look around here. And what you see in front of us here are the hoods we use for EPA purposes. Also helps keep the spark down a little bit, so safety concern as well. But we call them EPA-inspired hoods. They've been there since about the 1970s or so. But the process itself, it's an open-air burn. It's all man-done. It's like a giant bonfire, except we're making something out of it. So we have to cool the burn down as it goes to make sure we get charcoal. But if you cool it down too quickly, you're going to have unburned, soggy wood. And if you cool it down too late, you're going to have ashes. So from start to finish, it's about 2 hours long of a cooling process. It's very difficult. Honestly, it's basically the hardest way to make charcoal there is. But Jack did it this way, so we do it this way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, come on this way.
Do you guys want to see a closer look at what
Yeah,
is? Let's go take a peek. I got to come get a sneak peek yesterday, so I want to come show y'all.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
How often do you all do?
The burn?
Yeah.
Usually it's about one burn a day, and typically 3 days out of the week. The whole burn is actually need basis. So if you feel that slight warmth coming off of it, they burned once this morning.
You can feel it for sure. It's still very warm right here.
When it's burning at its peak, it's about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit roughly. And so the guys that do this during the summer, very hot. During the winter, not a bad job to have. Darren and Tracy, they don't mind it during this time of year. But when it's burning, you notice how they stack it. It's going to collapse in on itself about an hour into the burn roughly. And that's part of the technique of it. When that collapses, it's going to smother and make a nice little pile. And that's going to help slow the burn down and almost make the burn work for us. We let the fire cool itself or calm itself down. And then you help it along. You hit it with water from hoses. Too much water too soon or too little water too late, you've messed it up. But if you know what you're doing and got the touch, and it takes a little while to learn, eventually you'll teach somebody else and they'll take it from there. But we are very good at what we do. Darren and Tracy have both been doing this job almost 20 years. But it pretty much averages out to 6 burns a week on the average. We work smart, not hard.
Someone was asking how much wood is burned a day.
A day's time, we're pretty much just burning 4 ricks. So these 2 here and 2 on the backside.
And they're sugar maples, right?
Sugar maple.
Yeah. KPB, that one's for you.
Sugar maple is the same kind of wood that most people are familiar with because of maple syrup. They don't think about it being charcoal. And also around here, actually, in Tennessee area, we use sugar maple primarily for furniture and wood floors. And so it kind of throws people off because when you think about maple syrup and then you think about charcoal, you're going to think sweet and smoky. And then when you think about drinking Jack and the taste of Jack, it is slightly sweet and slightly kind of smoky or woody. So people sometimes put that together and they think that the charcoal actually flavors the whiskey. It's the complete opposite. What we're actually making out of this is an activated carbon filter, which is very similar to the concept of a Brita filter, except we filter whiskey instead of water. And our Brita filter is 10 feet tall. So we actually use 10 feet of charcoal from top to bottom. The whole vat is 14 feet height, and we'll see those later on as well.
I can't wait for them to see those.
Yeah.
They're so cool. Amazing. Any other questions, my friends, about this? The hood here, Ben was saying, was built in
1970s.
1970s.
Yep.
They're asking what it's made of.
The outside of it here is some sort of almost cement in a way. You spray it on, so it's some sort of masonry.
Cool.
They actually just redid it recently, so you see where it's got a different color to it here. All this stuff here that's lighter is newer, so they spray that on. But it's some sort of concrete or cement type thing, similar like what you'd have in a hearth. Yeah.
I have a feeling you're going to talk about this in just a little bit, but
Yeah.
somebody's asking, could you use that charcoal to grill on?
Well, after we're done with it. So when you've actually got the charcoal, the activated carbon, there's nothing character about it really. It's not the same thing as like a charcoal briquette. A charcoal briquette, you're going to have a lot of bio waste and stuff in there to make that stuff work and light and everything like that. But if you take our charcoal once we're done, it's been doing the job of filtering our moonshine, filtering the raw distilled alcohol, and it's going to actually gain some flavor character. So the way we recycle most of the charcoal is to a smoking pellet out of a company out of Arkansas. It's called the Jack Daniel's smoking pellet. So you put it in a bag. I think you use water, some nature, and then you smoke the flavors out from the charcoal.
And for those of you who've been to camp, sometimes when you say the campfire smells like whiskey, it's because we're using that. Just so you know. Amazing.
So I'll step up here. What they get from the burn is usually about this size. So you'll notice they're pretty chunky, they're pretty large, but then also a lot of inconsistent pieces. You got some small pieces there, and they sometimes can go bigger than that. So in the way of filtration, surface area is a key factor. So we're going to take this bigger piece, and we're going to mill this down to this. So this right here is the same stuff, just created smaller, and that's going to filter better because it increases surface area and contact. So we're going to see this stuff later, 10 feet deep. It's doing the job. So we just take another extra step, say, well, we just made the stuff. Let's make it smaller. Do that too, and then get it to that size because it works better. We live by a very simple phrase. Every day we make it, we'll make it the best we can. So if our logic tells us this is the way that works best, we're going to use that technique. It doesn't matter how much work it takes. We're not afraid of that. Not afraid of that. I'm going to throw this back.
Oh, absolutely.
Good.
One of the many things I love about the work you do here.
Yeah. It's always that above and beyond concept. So back in Jack's day, everybody, even, and they do now as well, they looked at the charcoal as an extra step. They said this is not necessary to make whiskey. And it's not. It's necessary specifically to make Tennessee whiskey because of the way we like how it works, which we'll talk more about when we look at the charcoal later. But to make whiskey, you don't have to use sugar maple charcoal filtration systems. It's just we think it does the job extremely well of taking out corn oils and fatty acids. And so Jack actually called it extra, but he called it an extra blessing. He looked at it in a positive way. But it's a kind of a concept of logic of, okay, why would we add more effort and more expense? Our opinion, it's needed, and then others disagree. And that's fine. Personal opinion. We make our whiskey, they can make theirs.
Exactly.
We have another charcoal question.
Yeah.
10 feet deep, can you only use that set of charcoal in the container once, or is that a fresh batch of charcoal every time you filter?
No, we'll talk. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that later. We'll discuss that. It's a continuous operation process of dripping through for quite a long time, but it's not just like a one and done situation at all. But yeah, we'll go more in depth later on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Tell them to hold on to it. Man. Out Darren and Tracy. I should have. You want to look at them?
Yeah. Let's go say hi.
They're probably in their break room if you want to come this way. We'll go off script.
Yeah, let's do it. This is the real behind the scenes stuff. It's also gorgeous out here.
Y'all want to say hey to some folks taking a virtual video here?
Hello.
How are y'all?
We're doing well. Thank you so much. We were just learning all about what you do over there. Thank you.
Man, he's a man of many words, Darren. So Darren and Tracy, they're our charcoal guys. Mm-hmm. So Tracy's been here about 20 years. Darren's about 18, 19 years now. If you've drank or seen Jack Daniels in the past 15 years, it came off that charcoal that these guys make.
That's awesome.
And that's cool to know. I was like, yeah, I saw the trucks back here. I said, I'll go see if they're there. Yeah. Y'all are done at about 1:30 or 2, yeah?
Oh, yeah, 1:30.
Yeah, man. Take a little time. All right, man.
We appreciate what you do.
See y'all.
Thanks, you too.
I thought that'd be fun to catch them off.
Absolutely.
So they work a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. So they're about to wrap it up.
Oh, my goodness.
5 days a week, charcoal production. And so that kind of settles in, oh, man, 2 people make every bit of charcoal for every drop of Jack.
Aww.
But we work smart, not hard. So Darren and Tracy, they are always ahead of the game. When they when they have some charcoal they need to change, they'll say, well, we just used a little charcoal. We need to make a little charcoal. And it's really simple as that. So they do. So we'll talk more about that later too.
Excellent. Where are we off to now?
We are down to the cave spring. We're heading that way. So as we talked about the single distillery source concept, we only have one distillery for the entire world because of this water source. The way I explain to people on tour, if you change your location, you change your water. And if you change your water, you change your product. And so it's the same concept with other whiskey brands, beer brands. You even hear stories about bagels and pizza dough and things like that connected to the water. New Yorkers know, you know. And so with that, we said, well, this water is what we've been using for so long. And eventually, once we got to the 1950s or so, it became where we were getting household name status. And with that, people expected Jack to taste a certain way. And the water is part of the character of Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey. And if we change location, it's no longer going to be Jack Daniel's. So we stay here. We make every single drop from it. But Jack chose it because it's iron-free and cold. If you have too much iron in your water, as most anybody in the whiskey world knows, it's not going to work. It's going to ruin color and flavor. That's why congregations of whiskey makers are always around limestone-rich environments. And then also the cold water concept. The cold water originally in the 1800s, early 1900s, that was refrigeration and cooling. And so they would use the water as their cooling system for fermentation, cooling distillation down, things of that nature. So this water we've got is 56 degrees Fahrenheit all the time, iron-free because of the limestone, and that's why Jack chose it. It was Whiskey Making 101. And it's also quite unique. There's not a water kind of setup like this around a large radius from here. And so he heard about it, said, let's go see how good it is. Once he realized how good it was, he said, we're moving up to Lynchburg.
We are going to head into the cave now, everybody.
So we're walking into the area that would have been our production location specifically for 1880s to early 1900s. But then after Prohibition, we started growing and building, and we wanted to go bigger. So with that, we started expanding things as far as the property goes. But when you walk up under here into the cave, you are going to be in the area Jack Daniel would have been for his first few years of making whiskey in Lynchburg, Tennessee. That's his office down there. We'll go through that shortly. So that is the oldest building we've got. It's the only building we have that predates the U.S. Prohibition era as well. So they would have started constructing that in the 1880s. I'll let y'all get a vista of it here, a good view. And I'll let y'all go on in there and take a look. I'll be right behind you.
I don't know if you all can see, but it is crystal clear. You can see right to the bottom.
So if you continue to travel inside, you can actually go to the back of this, roughly about 1.5 miles. And then our water collection point, where we actually pull it from, is about 100 yards from where we're standing from. We have to get above environment, because if you don't do that, you have to treat the water. And if you treat the water, you ruin the water. You're going to destroy the character of it that we were talking about in the first place. But the calcium levels, the magnesium levels, it's going to work very heavily with the yeast culture and the grain of the mash bill, and it's going to be part of that development of the Jack Daniel's character. So we say, well, we'll fix that. If we go inside and get above wildlife and humans and nothing can touch it, we can pull it as is. So we'll just run it through a sand filter similar to a pool filter and take out particulate and then put it to work. So we're pumping it up to the top of the hillside, and then we gravity feed it from the top of the hill down to production, which is over there these days. So bigger volume whiskey, we can't fit under the cave shelf anymore. But this would have been his roof right here, and he would have had basically his entire operation sitting right where we're standing, which is cool to think about.
Amazing. Somebody asked if this is all limestone.
It's limestone, yep. That's the magic.
Amazing.
What else? Any other questions?
Does any farm or municipality have access to the water from another spring location in the area?
No.
Okay.
We've got it all. Yeah.
Is there a risk of the spring drying up?
Well, I mean, the way people typically ask me, they say, do y'all worry about it? And I say, we don't worry about it per se, but always concerned, because you're going to be always concerned about anything within production you're doing for the quality and character of your product and the life of your product. But simplest answer, it's never failed us since the 1880s. Plus as well, though, management, very big for us on a lot of things. You have to manage it well, sustain it. So with the water specifically, I was mentioning how we pull it and send it to tanks. We've got a tank up there holding about 500,000 gallons, and then we actually have a few more above that. And our biggest one is actually a 10 million gallon reservoir up there that it cycles in and cycles out to keep the water fresh. But that way, if we do have any kind of drought kind of issues, we are covered. That's the contingency plan B kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
But never failed us since the 1880s, and manage it well on top of that.
As we're walking to the next location, do you want to tell them a little bit about all the water sustainability efforts that you've been working on?
Yeah, I mean, with anything we're doing, we're making sure we're not wasting water at all. So, like these days, we're not going to use that water for cooling system. There's no need for that. Jack would have relied on it, but these days, there's other ways, more manageable and smarter and sustainable to use water systems. So, we've got a recycling water cooler and heater in here that we don't use that water. We use municipal water because it doesn't touch the product. But if it touches product, it's going to be that water. But distinctly these days, for Jack, it would have been everything water. For us, it's anything that touches the whiskey as far as creation. So we're talking the cooking, the fermentation, the cleaning of some of that equipment as well, and then also the cooling of the rigs up there to make the charcoal. That's the water we use. But if we don't have to use that water for anything, we're not going to waste it that way.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think everyone's really impressed with just how stunning it is.
It's beautiful, yeah.
They want to know if there are any like hiking trails.
Yeah, I mean, around this property, we're not going to let a lot go on like that, but there actually is development has been over the past few years of the Lim Motlow Cave trail. So this cave has the spring running through it, but if you go up this way a little bit and you go up what we call Barbecue Hill, where our big event center is up there, underneath Barbecue Hill, there actually is a large cave system that is connected to this, which we call it the Lim Motlow Cave, and I'll tell you more about Lim Motlow in a second. But it's a dry cave. You can actually travel into the back of it and look around, and it's got some pretty good trail coming off and on. But nearby, I mean, you've got Tullahoma, Tennessee with Short Springs Park. You've got Monte Eagle going up to the Cumberland Plateau, and you can find all the trails and hiking you want.
They also want to know if you've ever caught anyone stealing the water, and is that even possible?
I've never heard of it happening. I mean, not really possible because we own the property around the water source itself for not only security but also protection of it. Make sure that nobody's doing anything that will mess with that water. And so that's pretty much taken care of. And then we don't use all of it. So actually a lot of it flows on to Mulberry Creek and then they can use it too. But yeah, I never heard anybody trying to steal the water. Steal the whiskey, I've heard different stories. But yeah. I've had somebody jump in there before, though. That was years ago. But story goes, they thought it'd be a good idea to get a little more natural and get in the water and see how it felt. And they did, and they got escorted out. That's why we pulled the water from inside. And there he is right there. Jack Daniel himself. But this guy is not life-size. I'll actually stand up here with him real quick. I'm roughly about 5'9" or so. This guy's about 5'7". Jack Daniel was 5'2" tall, and they say we're about a size 4 U.S. men's shoe. So like a lady size 5.5 or 6 or so. Very small, petite kind of guy in his younger years. And this is Jack, actually close to my age, in his low to mid 30s or so. But Jack, mustache height, my chin height or so, 5'2" tall. But Jack's personality is why we're talking about Jack Daniel as long as we've been talking about him. And so the reason this place became what it became, in part, is because of who this guy was. And his personality was larger than life, very unique for this area especially, but I'd say very unique for really compared to anybody. But he became a legend because larger than life character, attitude, work ethic, drive, yeah, very, very curious. So they said, well, we can't make him 5'2". That speak wrong of Jack Daniel. We're going subtle, and we're going to make him 5'7" or so and give the story to him.
Awesome.
What else? Anything else for now?
Let's go down to the office.
Let's go to the office. Come on down. Kind of looking at Maddie back there, one of our other tour guides. I'm going to see what she wants to do.
Absolutely.
How many do I have? I got 50 people, right? About 50?
Right now, I think we've got more than that much.
What? Sounds good.
Yeah.
So my tour moves a little slower with that many people, right? But she's got 2. It's a cold day, by the way. Not many people wanted to come see us today. So I'm going to let her jump us if she looks like she wants to. So we'll kind of hang out right over here, and you can get a view of the office, and we'll go in a second. So, oldest building we've got, also the only building that predates U.S. Prohibition era. So for us as a distillery, obviously very historically important. And actually for Tennessee, our Prohibition era started earlier than the federal move on it. Around this area of Tennessee, it was actually about 1909. And then the whole state was going dry by 1917. And so with that, this was the office pre-Prohibition. And then after Prohibition ended, and we came back down to Lynchburg and kind of got things going again, this office was still here, but they said we need to add another little bit onto it. So they added on in the 1940s to that side there. So believe it or not, this little building was the headquarters of Jack Daniel's until roughly 1955,
Wow.
and was originally built in the late 1880s. Wild.
That's amazing.
She seems all right. Let's go on in.
All right.
She doesn't seem in a hurry. Watch y'all step. So I mentioned that phrase already there. That's our mission statement. Those were Jack's words. Just ran with it. But every day we make it, we'll make it the best we can. And then underneath it, you do have the ingredients we're going to talk a lot more about here in a second. So corn and barley and rye. And we are now a two mash bill distillery. Up until a few years ago, we were one. So everything started the same, with 80% corn, 12% malted barley, and 8% rye. But a few years ago, we started developing rye whiskey. So we do have a rye coming off of 70% rye, 18% corn, and 12% malted barley. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And we were talking earlier about the beginnings of Jack and how he learned and when he met Dan. So when Jack was hired by Dan, he met a man named Nathan Green. So Nathan's nickname was Nearest. So Nearest Green was an enslaved man of Dan Call's, and also in this area reputed to be one of the best whiskey makers around. So Dan was a whiskey maker, but Nathan was also, and most likely better than Dan, and Dan recognized that. And he said, "You're so good at what you do, you be head of production for me." And also Nathan specifically was very talented with that charcoal mellowing system. And so when Jack moves in with Dan, not there to make whiskey, Nathan had that, but Jack got curious. And he said, "Well, I'm working at your store, I'm working for you around the house and the farm, can I also make whiskey?" And Dan said, "Why not?" Introduced him to Nathan Nearest Green. And then really from there, Jack became his student. So Nathan would have taught Jack whiskey, and Dan's wife would have influenced Jack on business, sales, marketing, agriculture. And after about 7 to 8 years or so, Jack put it all into one big ball and said, "All right, well, y'all just groomed me to be everything." And he was very skilled. And so he took over from Dan's operation because Dan was a Lutheran minister and a whiskey maker when the temperance movement began and people started getting very negative and hot on alcohol. And so eventually leads to Prohibition era. But around here, that was about 1865. And so just out of the Civil War as well. But they go to Dan with an ultimatum. They say, "You can't make whiskey and be a minister. Choose one or the other." He chose ministry, gave his operation to Jack. So Jack, in his mid-teens, becomes the owner of the operation. Within a year, 1866, becomes the founder of Jack Daniel's Distillery. But he looks at Nathan, and by that time, emancipation's been enacted, and he says, "Nathan, if you want to continue doing this, I'd appreciate it if you would." He realized how much he had learned from Nathan, how good he was at making whiskey, offered him the master distiller position, and Nathan took it and became the first hired man of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey. So this man right here, this is not Nathan. There's no existing photograph of Nathan Green, sadly. The family has no photo, and we're still looking. But this man is George Green. So George Green is one of Nathan's sons. His two sons, George and Eli, continued working with Jack. So this photo is very precious. It's the oldest photograph we've got of Jack and his crew. It's also an integrated photograph in the American South around early 1900s. Some say specifically by 1904. And that's culturally and socially very significant. But to know the family history, this tells the story. So Jack Daniel, hat, bow tie, vest, only man standing in the photo at 5'2" tall. But to his shoulder, George Green, one of Nathan's sons, and then these men are the Motlow brothers. And the Motlow brothers were Jack's legacy. And Jack never married, and to our knowledge, Jack never had children. You have to say it that way because of his ladies' man reputation. But Jack really had his nephews as his sons. So they took over after he was getting out of the biz, and also at 1911 passed away. But Lim Motlow became the second owner. And we'll talk more about that outside. But that photo speaks volumes to the family relationship because about 65% of our employment is generational. We employ about 700 people, and about 65% are family members. And then also within that, the original two families of Jack Daniel and Nathan Green have worked for Jack Daniel's Distillery since the very beginning, and now 154 years old together. So in this photo, you've got Jerome. Jerome and his two sisters have worked for Jack for years, and they are one of Nathan Green's direct descendants. And then this man, Chris Fletcher, is a connection through the family legacy. Chris Fletcher's our new master distiller, number 9. Chris, this is his grandfather, Frank Bobo. And Frank Bobo was our master distiller, number 6. And Frank Bobo's family is married into the Motlow family, so there's legacy there. And I believe y'all are going to be experiencing Chris later on, and it's a treat to get anything from this guy right here. He's an amazing guy, very, very intelligent. Now come on this way. Get over there. Just gonna hang out, and if anybody's got questions, we can chat about it.
Absolutely.
Liz, anything specific? All right, because that was a lot of history. Yeah, it can. I get lucky that I've been here for so long, I've had more time to marinate on it. So we were talking in the video earlier about just the realness of this place and the family history of the place, and that's one reason I like it so much, and a reason I think a lot of people appreciate Jack. It's not just the whiskey making, but then at the same time, we're very, very, very good whiskey makers. So it's a total package kind of thing. It's an interesting place to be for sure.
Absolutely.
Well,
What's behind you?
Well, y'all are taking a look at the modern day production of Jack, even though some of these structures would have been starting to be built in the 1940s, 50s era. We've just made Jack Daniels and kept on growing it, so we make it the same way, but we make more of it. So what used to fit underneath the cave shelf there, in between the office and the cave, this is it now. So anything that starts with the corn-based mash bill, like we were talking about inside, that's what's coming off of here. So our process is quite large these days as far as volume, but we're making it the same way. Sour mash technique that Chris will talk to you more about later on. The charcoal mellowing process is exactly the same as we've always done it, so we'll see that in a second. But one thing that has changed as far as production goes and the volume, the distillation. So as far as distillation goes, we're still using 100% copper, but we no longer use the pot still variety that we would have pre-Prohibition. So we make the whiskey, but make it bigger and faster now. But there's still 100% copper stills, and of course copper is the magic of distillation, attracting heavy elements like sulfur and doing its job, making it more pure and clean. So our stills are in that tall, skinny building there, and I'll tell you more about them in a second. But you start with your grain mill. You mill down corn, barley, and rye to a coarse flour. Then you add your water from the spring, creates mash. Then you cook it. The cooking converts starch down to sugar. And then you ferment, and fermentation is where the yeast comes in. The yeast is really considered the second most important part to the character and flavor of a whiskey. So we do have our own proprietary Jack Daniel's yeast culture, yeast strain. So it does its job, and usually about 4 days or so. And you ferment the mash to get alcohol built in and also develop flavor content. And then from there, distillation. And we'll talk more about that as we kind of stand in front of the still house. But Liz, any questions?
No, I think we're going to throw it to Brittany for just a minute.
All right.
Before we walk by.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Well, hello, friends. We are like halfway through this, and I feel like we've all already learned so very much. And I see that there are some questions we haven't gotten to yet, but in a tour this packed with information, this stuff uses a lot of battery, and like we're all living in this technology world. So we're going to swap in cameras, swap out cameras, but in the meantime, our studio, which is Leo, who is always running all of these streams for us, is going to pull up some pre-recorded videos of the space, particularly some spaces that you're going to see in just a bit and that you've already seen. So I know we've got some video of that beautiful, beautiful limestone cave that's bringing us all of that water. Here, Leo's got up. Here's the cave. We also have some kind of footage that like pans across all of these beautiful views from the distillery. Just like the scenery here is so much. Yesterday, I honestly didn't hear like the first 10 things that Ben said when we were doing our practice run, because I was just like, it's so beautiful here. But it looks like we have our ground team back online. They're swapping in all of their technical devices. So I'm sure we'll be back with them in a second. But don't worry, if you've asked a question and we haven't gotten to it yet, we can see them and we will get you some answers. So Jack team, are we ready to maybe catch up on a few questions and then go forward to see the rest of this place?
You got it.
Back on? All right. So 4 column stills. They're 40 foot tall. They're 100% copper, as we were talking about, and about every 2 feet inside. So 18 trays from top to bottom. You've got a large copper tray. It's almost like a large flat copper spaghetti strainer. Has holes in it about the size of a finger or so. So that does a couple of things. For one, after you ferment the mash and you've got what they call distiller's beer, as it goes through the column still, those trays are going to kind of slow it down a little bit, so you got time to heat it and steam it to get the alcohol from the mash. And then also, as the alcohol vapor is boiled off, it goes back up through the copper trays, and that's going to help, as we talked about, make it more pure and take out sulfur compounds and things of that nature. So the alcohol vapor goes back to the top. Then you carry away the vapor to cool it down to a liquid. And once you get this job done and you've turned that beer into moonshine, you've got 140 proof, just raw distilled alcohol. But 70% ethanol, 30% organics and water. And large volume. So Jack Daniel's these days, on an average day, usually makes enough whiskey to fill about 2,500 barrels, which those are 53 gallons apiece. So we make a round estimate, 24 hours a day, over 100,000 gallons of whiskey of the distilled spirit variety, and then also into the barrel and from there. But, yeah.
It's amazing.
So we will have a view in here of what they call a try box through this window. So the try box, if you ever go to the United Kingdom whiskey making, like Scotch for instance, they're going to typically call them whiskey safes. But as Americans, I guess we're very literal. So that box right there with the window in it, and it almost looks like a bathtub faucet. That's about 10 to 15 gallons of 140 proof, so 70% ethanol a minute. And so the box you can pull samples from. You got your hydrometer and thermometer in there, and also that's where you can watch it as well. Because if it's not crystal clear, you got a problem. So they always want to stay on top of that. They quality control check every 6 hours. So they're going to pull samples to take to QC. And of course, we're doing analytics on it chemically. But the main thing about it, this is still an art form. So everything we do, it's taste-based. So from beginning to end, it's a tasted process as well. But the foundation of the product, very scientific in the way of the chemistry, the microbiology, like with Kevin Smith, our microbiologist lead. And then Chris Fletcher, chemistry background. And so I'll let him get more into that later on.
Fantastic. We have a question.
Yeah.
Did the county stay dry after Prohibition or go wet and then come back to dry?
So they slowly kind of evolved a little bit. So when we first came out of Prohibition in the state of Tennessee, it was 1938. And that's when they allowed Lim Motlow to start producing here again. And so he started building things back, but the state of Tennessee for a little while wouldn't even sell his product for the first few years. And then from there, more counties stayed dry in the sense of sales. So even to this day, there are no liquor stores, bars, or taverns, but we can make whiskey here. We can distribute it from here. We also have the bottle shop as part of the tours and the visitor center kind of production going on. So you can buy souvenir bottles of Jack Daniel's from our location. And then we do the tastings. We started doing sampling tours at around about 2012. Very limited volume for safety and reliability. We don't want anybody getting in their vehicles having too much in their system. So it's roughly 1.5 ounces spread across 5 or 6 samples, but you get enough just to taste the whiskey and see what you think about it. And they've become very successful and popular. People like getting the whole package of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go try it all.
Yeah.
We were back at the office. The sound cut out a little bit. Can you talk about the mash bills one more time?
Yeah. So 2 mash bills. The original and the more dominant one is 80% corn, 12% malted barley, 8% rye. And then the newer mash bill that we started developing is the rye base. So 70% rye, 18% corn, and 12% malted barley. They both use the same yeast culture. So when they were trying to develop the rye, they somewhat assumed we would find another yeast strain or culture and use it. But we ended up deciding our original yeast culture is the one we're going to stay with. And so it's all the same yeast, just 2 different recipes or mash bills.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Somebody was wondering how many employees did Jack have when he first opened the distillery?
So when you're talking originally, it was Jack and Nathan. So 1866, when Jack and Nathan were beginning this, they would have really been it. Jack would have focused on ownership, management, sales, of course, founding the distillery. And then Nathan would have been the master distiller, head of production focus for about 15 years. But as they grew, of course, a few others came in. So like the Motlow brothers, The nephews of Jack Daniel, they started working for Jack in their mid to upper teens. Lim was about 17. And then Nathan's sons, George and Eli, started working with their father and with Jack. And so eventually, as we moved up into this area, and that photograph we saw earlier was around about early 1900s, I mean, you had a handful of folks, roughly 20, 25 in that photograph, and that would have really been it. Wow. And now we employ 650 plus.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We had one more question. Leo, can you pull that one back up? I want to make sure I get it right. Okay, perfect. They were asking, could you mention why Nathan was called Nearest?
We don't really know. I've never heard the history to it. Of course, the Uncle Nearest brand is something now in existence in Shelbyville, Tennessee. They might know more to the story than I do, honestly, but they usually share information quite freely with us to make sure we're all telling the story the same way. Yeah. But I've never heard exactly why he was called Nearest Green. And you'll actually see it spelled different ways. Some spellings are Nearis, and some spellings are Nearest. But yeah, first name Nathan, but Nearest, where I'm not sure of the origin of the name.
There are a couple of mysteries around here.
Yeah. Oh, there's many. There's many. We don't know why we're the number 7 brand. Jack and Lim chose that number in 1908 and trademarked it. But why Jack chose the number 7 as his brand number, that's a mystery, honestly. Yeah.
Somebody says 2,500 barrels a day. Did I hear that right? Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah. And we'll talk more in charcoal mellowing about the fact that, yes, we make big whiskey, but we put a lot of heart and soul into this. We really do consider ourselves the largest craft whiskey maker in the world. People sometimes laugh at us when we say that, but when they really sit and think about it, it starts to dawn on them. We put it into the product. We don't skimp. We don't skip corners. Charcoal mellowing will blow your mind.
Well, let's go see it.
Yeah. So from distillation, you're going to send the moonshine, 70% ethanol, up to the top of the charcoal. And then from that point, it's a gravity-fed system. And a lot of things we do in that way are basic in a way. It's a very smart technique, but you're just using height to your advantage. And it's really coming out of this place being a farming community. A lot of things are built upon concepts that farmers used, because back in Jack's day, that's all this place was. Nowadays, Lincoln County, Moore County, and the surrounding area is primarily farms, and then you got Jack Daniels around it and in the middle of it. So very big things connected to that as far as the way we operate. But gravity feed, pretty simple. You send the whiskey to the top, and it's going to fall down through the building just because of gravity. You don't pump it at all. So you're going to pump it to the top and then let it drop.
Amazing.
I like that run. I'll have to remember that.
Somebody's asking how long you ferment.
Fermentation's roughly 4 days. It all depends really on the weather, because the hot and cold, humid and dry can affect the fermentation process. So average 4 days, but sometimes as less as 3 and sometimes as many as 5 or 6. Yeah.
Well, something you said to me yesterday that stuck with me a little bit is that everything here is about taste, and there's no exact calendar time that it's done.
Yeah, no calendar. So fermentation is affected by weather. Of course, maturation, the aging is affected by weather, Mother Nature. And so it's an art. It's taste, not time for maturing whiskey. With fermentation, you're just waiting on it to finish out and get its job done. And sometimes that takes 3, sometimes it takes 5. Yeah. But you're looking for about a 12% alcohol volume, the right flavor character, the right pH and everything.
Excellent. All right. Want to head on in?
Let's go. And I'll let y'all go first there, kind of get a bottom view of one of our vats. So we're seeing this in a reverse kind of order. We came in from the bottom, so then this is the bottom of the vat. I always like to give it a hug sometimes. It's been doing a good job for a very long time. So we use cypress and white oak for the wood. So these are built out of moisture-resistant wood species, so they can last a very long time. The charcoal vat does not operate like a barrel. It's not really holding liquid. It's holding charcoal, and the liquid's passing through. So they're built very similar to silos.
Not.
Let's see which one has the best view. Probably this one. This one looks really dry. There's not much condensation on it.
Perfect. Do you see it dripping, guys?
And that is it. So if you ever look on the side of a Jack Daniel's bottle, the black label, for instance, you're going to see a phrase that says charcoal mellow drop by drop. That's very, very literal. People take that as like a gimmick slogan, and it is a slogan, but you're looking at it right here. So what we do is we say, well, Jack Daniel made his whiskey with a 14-foot tall charcoal mellowing vat with 10 feet of charcoal inside, sugar maple charcoal we talked about earlier, and then you drip it on gravity feed, and it's about a gallon a minute. So we said, we'll take that same concept and we'll just add to it. We don't change the process. The speed's the same, the drip's the same, the system's the same, but now we have 72 of them. So this room, 24 vats, the next room, 24 vats, and then the third room at 24 vats apiece. So 72 vats total, and that way we can say, well, we need to make roughly on a day's time, 24 hours a day, about 70 gallons a minute of the distilled spirit to run through charcoal to put to a barrel to keep up with world demand from 5 years from today. But with that process, 70 gallons a minute, we're not going to change this. We're just going to do Jack Daniel's process and multiply it. So we've got it worked out. Same whiskey, but more of it.
Amazing.
The way I word it to people, we accommodate for the process. We don't accommodate for the volume.
That's amazing.
We'll make it work. And y'all actually picked a really cool time to come. I think you can kind of reach over there. So you see how that lid is off?
Yes, guys, it is all charcoal.
Yeah. This was not like this earlier today. So what they decided is that charcoal is ready to change. So what you're seeing is the top side of 10 feet. And the way they decide if the charcoal needs to be changed out is taste-based. So what they've got here is they start pulling samples of whiskey or moonshine at the bottom about 6 months in. And after about 6 months, you start checking flavor. And if it's not doing its job of filtering corn oils and fatty acids properly and making the character we want, you can tell based off smell. So 6 months you start, but it's not going to be typically wearing out at 6 months old. It's usually going to last us up to about 9 months at the earliest and 12 months at the latest. And it's all dependent on the gravity feed. Some are a little slower, some are a little faster because of the distance. So 9 to 12 months, easy. We're getting out of charcoal. And then we were talking earlier about what we do with it and how it's recycled. So with that, 9 or 12 months old, that one batch is going to last us. That stuff comes out, suck it out with a vacuum truck, sell it to Arkansas, and make the Jack Daniel smoking pellet. So y'all see this hose system rigged up to it? That's water. And that's going to be how we flush the charcoal before we sell it. So even though it does have character in it for the charcoal pellet, it's going to actually be where we get most of our whiskey back, because this is absorbing things that we can actually recuperate and we can use again. So we're going to flush it, get most of it back, leave a little bit for the smell and flavor for the group taking it after us. But they flush it like this with this hose for about 7 days. So you see where this ball is in? That's their gauge. They'll fill it to that, and once that starts to raise, they'll let the water drop for a few days, and then they'll fill it back up and let the water drop. So it's nearly a week-long process of cleaning it out. And then they come in here and put new charcoal in. They dump it in and stack it or pack it layer by layer, shovels and feet. That's what Darren and Tracy do. They make it, they mill it, they change it.
Amazing. And do you know how much charcoal is in there, or 10 feet?
Well, 10 feet, but pound, it's about 1,800 pounds, I believe is what it comes out to. I did the math one time on cubic volume, and I forgot what it is. It's been a couple of years.
We can do the math.
Yeah.
And it says that's still 140 proof new make.
Yep.
Correct.
Yep, that's the new make whiskey. So after it comes out the bottom, still 140 proof, but it's what you call after mellowing. So you got before and after. But after it comes out the bottom, still 140 proof, no color added. It doesn't do that. The first whiskey through picks up a little bit. It's just like you're priming your Brita filter and you have to rinse water through and it'll be a little bit cloudy. But at the bottom, there's a filter, almost like a coffee filter in a concept of a way. And also, we do capture the first whiskey through as well to actually go back through with the process on it, because the first whiskey through the charcoal doesn't get filtered quite as well or evenly as what comes after. So they're going to actually collect that and do that anyway. So no color at the bottom. And then also along with that, no flavor added, as we talked about. Just filters out corn oils and fatty acids and smooths it, balances it, mellows it out. And it's, yeah.
On the rinse charcoal, the water that comes out afterwards, do you use that to proof the whiskey down?
Yeah. No, well, the stuff that comes out the bottom, it starts back over.
Okay.
Now, after the barrel, we do put water into the barrel to actually soak and pull alcohol and whiskey from the wood of the barrel. That is often used to actually proof whiskey down. And another thing we do is all the stuff that's inside a barrel. You've got sediment, chips of char, wood, sawdust from where you made the barrels as well. That stuff is going to actually be filtered and captured, and then we soak it in water, and it's got a screen at the bottom. So you soak it, you pull the screen up, and then you've got all this stuff that you can actually use to make steam. We actually burn the sawdust to make steam. But then you've also got a mixture of alcohol and water you can use for proofing. For
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, very cool.
Cool.
So a very, very big point to make, especially since y'all have been working with other brands of the nature of Old Forester and Woodford Reserve. We are a bourbon standard whiskey, but we don't use the bourbon name. So the way I explain to people, Tennessee whiskey is born from a bourbon whiskey. Everything we do is identical except for the charcoal. This is the process that separates our styles. And it's not just, oh, this is extra, so we did use a different name. It's going to change the character of the whiskey. It's going to change the process of making the whiskey after this from the barrel concept. And so Tennessee whiskey born from a bourbon. So that way, credit to both. And then also, I've started saying this recently. It seemed to catch on. Tour the other day, he said, no, you need to keep saying that. Bourbon by nature, Tennessee whiskey by choice. A lot of folks don't realize that bourbon by nature, that is what we are. But we use a different labeling because of the charcoal mellowing system. And if we didn't use charcoal mellowing, sugar maple charcoal mellowing, we would have to use the Jack Daniel's bourbon whiskey label. But that's the relationship. Tennessee whiskey born from a bourbon whiskey.
Amazing. Well, we have about 10 more minutes. Where do we want to go next?
We're going to the barrel house.
Awesome. Goodbye, best smelling room in the world.
Y'all watch y'all step coming down.
Thank you.
I know yesterday you let us smell the charcoal and said that it also sanitized our mouth.
Yeah. You're dealing with the same kind of alcohol volume that you're working with, washing your hands and whatnot.
Yeah.
And as well, on that point, we have been making ethanol base for hand sanitizer as well as making whiskey.
Oh, awesome.
So as soon as the pandemic was kind of hitting hard and people were having struggles with having hand sanitizer, things like that, we dedicated 2 of our column stills completely to hand sanitizer.
That's awesome.
So we bottled some of that ourselves, and we would bottle it from the distillery here. That's actually what gave me a job during the pandemic, because our visitor operations, we couldn't even do virtual stuff.
Right.
Then we kind of had to figure that out eventually. But they're like, what do we do with a guy that talks for a living? So they sent a lot of our team down to bottling, and we were mainly worked in bottling hand sanitizer.
Awesome.
And then we worked a contract with a lot of areas around that make the official kind of sold hand sanitizer stuff.
Yeah.
And we worked as their base. And so we had a lot of stuff going on there.
Cool.
But our stuff was just given to medical teams and first responders and hospitals.
Cool.
Big volume, small volume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Hey, Kimmy. We got a virtual tour with quite a few bartenders that are watching us right now. I'll go ahead and introduce them.
Hi.
Any questions while we're walking down to the barrel house that anybody has?
I haven't seen any. Brittany, have any come your way?
Nope, not yet. I think everybody's still processing the charcoal room and how jealous they are that they weren't actually in the charcoal room.
Oh, Leo, can you pop whatever Brittany's saying up on screen so we can see it? Connectivity out here is a little tricky.
They went quiet on us, huh?
Yeah, this is the part that the connectivity doesn't like to work on.
Well, hey, this is a boring part.
Just going on a pretty walk.
Yeah, it's a pretty walk.
What are the holidays like around here?
like as far as business for
Yeah.
us, usually pretty popping. Thanksgiving was moving. Of course, we're seeing fewer numbers, but we're still basically seeing the same number of tours. So we were filling tours of 15 to 20 people, but with that, we were still sending them 5-10 minutes apart or so.
Oh, wow.
On the average over the Thanksgiving holiday.
So Crystal Beth asks, in wine, there's a term called materials other than grapes, MOG, i.e. snakes, mice, bugs, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
That account in the fermentation. Is
Yeah.
there anything like that with whiskey?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the specifics of it, you would have to talk to Chris maybe. He would know more on it for sure. But there is a limit of materials that shouldn't be there.
Sure.
Because fermentation used to be an open air process. A lot of distilleries still do that. I know Woodford still does some of that. But with us, we're a closed process. But you do actually have where you have to open the top and shut it to get samples. And of course, on tours, as before COVID, we take people through fermentation and look at it. We would open the doors and actually let people look at it themselves. So there's a fine line of, I guess, what can be there and what can't. But it's a pretty open process in some ways. Good thing is we're making a very sanitary product after that. So we're destroying materials of that nature. What else? Anything else?
Got any more for us, Leo? Oh, well, yeah. Jennifer, we wish you were here with us too.
Come see us when you can. We're open.
Yeah, Joey, well, that answered your question right there.
We are open.
They are open, but they have a ton of social distancing measures. You
Yeah.
have to get your temperature taken before you get in here. Everybody's got to stand 2 barrels apart.
Mask all the time.
Mask 100% of the time, and they definitely are policing that, so everything's very safe. Timothy, me too.
So what you have in front of you is the oldest and smallest barrel house we've got, still active. So this was built back in 1938 in the backyard of Mr. Lim Motlow, the nephew. So that's actually a reproduction of his home. You can kind of see over the bush line there. So Lim, second owner, and then after Lim, it was his sons, the great nephews of Jack Daniel, Rager, Robert, Connor, and Hap, and they all ran the business from that old office we were in earlier. The operating headquarters still by 1955. And then the Brown Foreman came into our story. So Brown Foreman, we basically needed help. We needed infrastructure. We said, look, we've got production. We've got something special, and we're doing very well with it. But we need the help in growing it and managing it the proper way. And so we started looking around for the right match. And Brown Foreman was better than we could ever imagine, honestly. Without Brown Foreman, Jack would have not gone to the worldwide icon status. Without Jack Daniel's heart and unique character, we wouldn't have gone to the icon status. So the partnership together worked very, very, very well. So we're one of Brown Foreman's umbrella groups. They're over us as far as infrastructure and everything, and we just do our thing down here in Lynchburg, make Jack Daniels the way Jack did.
I love it.
What else? Anything before we step inside?
Just so y'all know, the connectivity inside is not very good. We do have some video pre-recorded for you, so if you lose us, we'll send you right to that video. So if you've had any questions at all, shoot them our way right now. But you will be in with Chris if you're part of the program in just a moment. All right, let's go in.
So this one currently holds about 600 barrels of live whiskey. So it's a kind of a small scale version. So what we're working with now are 92 active barrel houses, all within a roughly 6-mile radius of where we are here in the distillery area that we've been walking through. And our capacity varies from 20,000 barrels to 40,000 barrels to over 60,000 barrels apiece in each barrel house design. We basically have 3 different designs as the kind of normal. So we have 7-story tall versions like you saw at the beginning. We have 4-story tall, we have 3-story tall. And so no climate control, no insulation, temperatures work naturally. So you let the summertime get the barrel hot and the wintertime get the barrel cold. So these are breathing. They're opening and closing, letting the whiskey go into the wood during the summer and back into the barrel during the winter. And we do it based off taste and visual, not time. But we use timing as almost like an oven timer, in the way I explain to people. You set the timer goes off, you see if it's done in the oven, and if it's not done, you leave it. So 4 years old is a minimum. 8 years old for most of Jack Daniel's character in this environment and weather is going to be a maximum. But the sweet spot that most Jack Daniel's taken out is between 5 to 7 years old or so. And then you go to bottle with it.
Amazing. How many barrels are made from each batch?
barrels made from each batch? Or how many bottles made from each?
Maybe.
So-
Jeff's asking how many barrels go into each batch is his question. But
Okay, for mixed mingle married.
Yeah.
Okay, so we typically have about 250 to 300 barrels of, say, Old Number 7 Jack mingled together to make enough to get a consistency out of it, because every barrel is slightly different. And so barrels are like fingerprints. So when you go and pull a sample from a barrel, you're going to pull it in blocks and say, well, this block is ready to go. It tastes right and looks right. But you are going to have the individuality of the barrel. So like the single barrel bottled style is going to be inconsistent. It's going to taste a little different every time, but a very unique whiskey, very mature whiskey. With the black label, we want it to be consistent. It's the #1 selling whiskey in the world, partly because of that. So with that, we mingled together about 250 to 300 barrels average to get a consistent product out of it.
So cool.
So it's like taking fingerprints and making one. If it doesn't say single barrel on it, that's how it's produced from us. Yeah.
So cool. Well, Ben, I got to tell you, this has been an amazing hour. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for showing us around your
You're
home
welcome.
here. We adore Jack Daniels, and we really appreciate all your time.
Well, we thank y'all for watching. We thank y'all for serving Jack, of course. Y'all are our front lines. We thank y'all for drinking Jack. If you are a fan, if you're not, you might be now. I don't know. If not now, after you're with Chris Fletcher for a good while, you'll probably by that time be like, yeah, I need to get into this one. Because it's a special place. It's a special production. It's a special product. And Chris will give you anything else you want on answers of anything you want to know about.
Fantastic. Well, thanks y'all for joining us. We'll see you over in the workshop if you are joining us. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.